Tonight's episode of Legacy Battle is brought to you by Atlas Benefits.
Atlas Benefits has solutions for your insurance needs. Atlas Benefits can help you obtain Medicare, health, or life insurance and employee benefits. You can find them on the web at www.atlasbenefits.com.
Or you can contact Rob Ducey or Roy Smith at 727-600-2892 and mention Legacy Battle Podcast. Atlas Benefits has all the solutions for your insurance needs. Enjoy the show. This is Legacy Battle. Make sure you hit subscribe, whatever you're listening on YouTube, iHeart, Spotify, Apple, Podnods, whatever platform you're on, hit that subscribe button. I'm Michael Adams, creator of Legacy Battle. My panelists tonight from the Gridiron Battle Zone, Brian King, Ball State Athletics, Paul Habicott. And you might notice down there at the bottom of our screens here, we got Scott Crawford. He's been on the show prior. He's the Director of Operations for the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, and he's in that Canadian Top 100 most influential people in baseball up there. So good panelists to have tonight. Our special guest, we're joined by an 11-year MLB relief pitcher. He's with the Orioles and the Dodgers briefly, but is, of course, most known for his 9 seasons with the Minnesota Twins. He was one of the best relief men in the business. He had a standout year in 96, going 5-1 with 6 saves and a 3.01 ERA. He's got another season with 24 saves in there. And he has 3 seasons in the top 6 for appearances, so they weren't afraid to throw him out there on the mound. It's the Twins' 1992 Rookie of the Year, Mike Trombley. Mike, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here, guys. Thanks.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one. I love doing these Who Was the Best shows, and tonight is the greatest World Series winner of the 1980s. And as always, we'll have a Q&A afterwards with Mike about his career. But we're going to start this out with the 1989 Oakland Athletics.
Yeah, we got great nostalgia here. Some good 80s and 90s names in this World Series. Really 80s baseball at its finest with Ricky Henderson, Bash Brothers McGuire and Canseco, Dave Parker, the World Series MVP, Dave Stewart, Dennis Eckersley. Giants had stars too, Kevin Mitchell, Will Clark, Jeff Brantley. But, coming off the year where they got swept by the Dodgers thanks to what looked like a aging softball player and Kirk Gibson hitting this massive, barely clearing home run and hobbling around the bases, and an on-fire Oral Hershiser. The 89 Athletics finished with a regular season record of 99-63 under Tony La Russa. They finished first in the AL West, and the Giants were almost equally as potent with 92-70 record. They were first place in the NL West. A couple of stats here for the stat heads. This was the 4th time these two met in the World Series since 1913. It's actually the first time representing California. First 3 times the two teams met, Giants were in New York, and the A's were representing Philly. So if you look at the dates, it looks like kind of an exciting World Series. It starts on 10-14, ends on 10-28. Looks like it went the full 7 games. But it actually only went 4 games. Oakland swept. And at the time, October 28th was the latest date ever for a World Series, surpassing the 86 by 1 day. That one went the full 7. So Oakland winning is actually probably the least interesting thing. Is on 17th of October, about 5 o'clock p.m., prior to the start of Game 3, the Loma Prieta earthquake struck, and that damaged the bridge between Oakland and San Francisco, specifically the Cypress Street Viaduct and the bridge's upper deck. Candlestick Park in San Francisco suffered a little bit of damage to the upper deck as pieces of concrete fell from the baffle at the top of the stadium, and the power was knocked out, so the game got postponed out of concerns for safety. Everyone at the ballpark left, as well as loss of power, and Vincent said, I don't know when play will resume. So the series did end up resuming on October 27th, finished the next day. None of the games were really within 3 games, but really, think about the odds of this. Those 2 teams in that World Series, that earthquake at that time damaging both cities. So was it a great series? No, probably not. Really, can any swept series be a legacy? But does the sheer odds of the two cities experiencing tragedy, would that make it a legacy or something that we would remember all the time?
So everybody remembers that earthquake, of course. I remember seeing it on TV and just being shocked like this had occurred. And the fact that, yeah, those cities are just so close to one another. But Mike, let me come to you. You can speak about the earthquake if you want, but the A's in general, everybody, when you think them, first thing you think is Bash Brothers, but that team had some solid pitching with Dave Stewart, Honeycutt, Eckersley. I mean, they could get it done defensively and pitching, not just with the hitting.
Yeah, and again, I got some stats in front of me, and it's all not always about stats. What jumps out at me is, you look at this team and the names, and obviously the wow factor of Canseco, McGuire, and Henderson, and the other Henderson, Dave Henderson, and Carney Lansford. I forget how good Carney Lansford was, but it's interesting. You look at the stats, and it's their pitching that took them through. They're first in wins, they're second in ERA, they're first in shutouts and saves, obviously with Eckersley, and not a lot of offensive categories were they ever first in. None of them. I mean, you think about this, just overpowering teams with this lineup of McGuire and Canseco and Ricky Henderson, but it's their pitching that really got it done for them. So, again, my first gut reaction is the wow factor is this is a pretty darn good team. But then when I start looking at the numbers, I mean, they hit, 261 for the season. And again, I'm not looking at average translating to wins, but, their ERA was 3.09. I'm looking back, and I think a couple of years from now, we'll look back at the names that played on this team, like the Dave Parkers. I know Canseco was hurt for a good part of the year, and Parker filled in. And you look at this team, and as a pitcher who wasn't not a Hall of Fame member, and by no means was I a great pitcher in the major league realms, I'm looking at this lineup going, I wouldn't want to pitch to them. So the wow factor is, they're pretty solid. And I think that was a good point about the earthquake. It took, and I played with Terry Steinbach in Minnesota, and it really put a damper on the World Series. So I look at this team as kind of a forgotten World Series champion and how good they were. And looking at this, just the stats, the pitching was terrific. I mean, golly, solid. It's tough to find a better combined staff over a season than these guys in the 80s.
Brian, let me ask you, he mentioned Carney Lansford. We know how good he was. Terry Steinbach. I think it was Walt Weiss's rookie year too, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, Weiss was, he was with them. Yeah.
So these guys had not just the All-Stars, they had clutch players, the get down and dirty players that you want. I mean, that's part of what it takes to win a championship, right?
I mean, you see that almost in every World Series. There's always some blue collar guy that steps up that you really don't expect to, that makes a difference. And the A's had no shortage of those guys for sure.
The Mark Lemke's of the world, man.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
For us born in Pittsburgh, we'll forever remember Mark Lemke. All right, let's move to our second team tonight. That's going to be the 86 Mets.
All right, the 86 Mets. They were led by Davey Johnson, 108 and 54 on the season, which is the sixth most wins in Major League Baseball history. They beat the Phillies in the NL East by 21 and a half games, which is insane. The seasons before, this team was kind of on the cusp of greatness. In '84 they were 90 and 72, second in the NL East. '85 they were 98 and 64, second in the NL East. They made a couple key additions in the offseason. They brought in Tim Tuffle to help out at second base and platoon, and then they also brought in Bobby Huida, a very good left-handed starting pitcher. So when you look at the staff, your picture behind me, first off, you got Dwight Gooden, went 17-6 that year, 200 Ks, 2.84 ERA, just had a wicked fastball. Ron Darling, 15-6. He had 5 pitches that he could, in his repertoire. Bobby Ojeda, like I mentioned, 18-5, 2.57 ERA. Sid Fernandez, 16-6. 200 Ks, and then you had Rick Aguilera. He was 10-7. So the staff, top to bottom, really, really good. Out of the bullpen, you had a great combo of two closers. You had Roger McDowell and Jesse Orozco. Each of them had over 20 saves on the season. And then you had a young Randy Myers who was a fireballer. He got better later on, but he was even at that point he was clocked over 100 miles an hour on his fastball. So overall, this staff was ranked first in the league in ERA, second in Ks, and second in fewest walks per 9 innings. Then you go around the rest of the lineup. You had the great Gary Carter, 24 home runs, 105 RBIs on the year, one of the best catchers of all time. Keith Hernandez, quiet leader on this team, 83 RBIs, 310 batting average, Gold Glove. You had Wally Backman at second. He batted 320 on the year. Rafael Santana, he was a good fielding shortstop. Ray Knight, he came up big really often in during this season. George Foster, he was a veteran. He has power. Lenny Dykstra, and then of course Darryl Strawberry. I mean, 5-tool player, really great player there. And then off the bench, you had Mookie Wilson. We'll get more into him later. Kevin Mitchell had some power, 12 home runs. Howard Johnson. I mean, when you got these guys coming off your bench, I mean, that's a really deep roster. They had the most runs scored in the NL, most hits, most walks, and the best batting average in the NL. So really stacked lineup. So we get to what went down in this season. NLCS against the Astros. The Astros had a great pitching staff with Mike Scott, Bob Nepper, Nolan Ryan, but the Mets were able to overcome it. They won the series 4-2. They almost had to play another complete game because they had games that went into 12 innings and a game that went into 16 innings. And then the World Series against the Red Sox. We all know how this one went. They went down 0-2. They showed the resilience. They took the next two games. Then with their backs against the wall, down 3-2, they won the final two to take the series. Game 6 was epic. I mean, ingrained in everybody's memories. 10th inning, Bob Stanley throws a wild pitch. Then Mookie Wilson's grounder. It goes through the legs of Bill Buckner, allowing Ray Knight to score. The Red Sox before that pitch, the Red Sox had a 99% win probability. But, the Mets just refused to lose. Bob Ojeda, he was quoted as saying, we all knew that we were going to win Game 7 after what happened in Game 6. This was a really fun team, too. I mean, they were notorious. We know about the drinking. We know about the chasing babes. All kind of things were going on, all kind of shenanigans in the clubhouse. It's too much to even talk about, but this was just a legendary team, one that's ingrained in our memories that we'll just never forget.
So, Mike, I look at this team. I don't see any weaknesses. Everybody at some point was an all-star in their career, just about as far as the starting lineup goes, and those guys who came off the bench. Your thoughts on the '86 Mets, the pitching staff, like Brian had mentioned. I mean, you got Gooding, you got Darling. These guys were just fantastic. Ojeda, your thoughts on the '86 Mets?
Well, you look at 108 wins, and they were beating some people up pretty good during the season. But I remember that, and again, I came from Red Sox country, so this is not a fun thing to talk about. I'm from Massachusetts, so it's rough. But like you said, the Mets. I mean, on paper, you're looking at these things and say, of course they won the World Series. Look at the lineup. But I remember this postseason. And in my opinion, one of the top postseasons in history, maybe 1991. But what they had to do to get to the World Series, what they had to do to win the World Series, whether the Red Sox lost or the Mets won, it was just incredible what they did. And you look at the stats. I mean, just looking at the team stats, what they hit and the home runs and stuff like that, they weren't overpowering. They weren't knocking the ball out of the ballpark all the time. And, but with Hernandez and Strawberry and Carter and Knight and Dykstra and Backman, it just goes on and on. And then you got Kevin Mitchell, who wasn't the quite Kevin Mitchell that he became, but the George Fosters, the Kevin Mitchells, the Mookie Wilsons, the Tuffles, the Danny Heaps. I mean, really solid team. And I mean, you add in Sid Fernandez and Rick Aguilera as really good starters. Like you mentioned, the two closers, they had everything you needed in a team. Other than that 6th game, I think that actually hurt the Mets, what we're talking about today. I think if they had gone out and won the World Series in 5 games or something like that, we'd be looking at the Mets completely different. Because they stumbled a little bit and had a little tough time through the playoffs, which they got it done, give them a lot of credit. They kind of, I think, went down a rung or two in people's minds about how good they were. But this was a solid team. I mean, this is a team that you don't want to play. So,
Scott, let me ask you, we mentioned the Buckner play. Does that make it maybe feel more like this was a team of destiny? And especially since the fact that they only got 1 World Series with those people on their teams, I find that shocking.
It is. They were obviously such a great team, and it's one of those things where, you know, that play is, you know, no one expected it when it happened. You're like, it's got to be now they're going to win the next game, and it turned out that way. Of course, you got to play the game. You never know, but it definitely turned out that way, and it was one of those memories that you know, poor Bill Buckner. He had an amazing career, but you never forget that play. And then the next game, obviously they took it.
Paul, that Buckner play, is it overblown in your mind?
Nothing I can say. It hasn't been exhaustively covered. I think it's unfair. I looked at that replay a million times. He thought the ball was going to do something else, and it didn't, and that could happen to anybody. And I think it's unfair. He was a good ball player, man. That's a really good ball player, and I hope that he found peace after that. Because I think him and Mookie ended up doing like book tours and stuff where they would autograph it, but pretty unfair to blame him for that. That wasn't even like a Game 7 or anything like that.
Right, exactly. People forget the Red Sox lost Game 7. All right, let's move on to the 85 Kansas City Royals.
Yeah, right. So the good old Royals. First of all, they, of course, being up here in Canada, I'm not overly happy with how the Royals did in the 85 playoffs, but they are a darn good team. They beat our Blue Jays, of course, with the help of Mother Nature, we'll say. But the Royals, they were down 3-1 to the Blue Jays. They were down 3-1 to the Cardinals, and they came back both series and won in 7. So they played 14 games, which was the most playoff games of any of these teams. To play 14 games. You might consider I know we're talking how good the Royals were, but you might consider the Cardinals the team of the decade in the 80s. They were the only team in the World Series 3 times in the 80s. They were 82, 85, 87. So arguably you could say the Royals beat the team of the decade, and which is pretty impressive. The Cardinals led the NL with 825 wins in the decade, and the Royals beat them in the World Series. The Royals had the 3rd best record in the 80s in the American League. So you don't necessarily think the Royals is a good, strong team, but they were the 3rd best team over the whole decade and beat the best team of the decade in the World Series. The most unique thing about this thing is you look at their pitching line for the World Series. Their ERA is 1.89 for the series. They only used 6 pitchers in 7 ball games, and they had 3 complete games. So try to work that into any World Series or playoffs, whether it's the 80s or today, when you use 6 pitchers over 7 games. And those starting pitchers were just amazing. You know, it went 7 games, but the Royals, they won 11-0. They won 6-1, they won 6-1 again, and then they won 2-1. And the games they lost 3-1, 4-2, and 3-0. So they destroyed the Cardinals in 3 of the games, and 3 of the losses were all really, really close games. So, and like some of these other series we're talking about, there's always the unsung hero, Lonnie Smith for the Royals, hit 333 in the World Series with a 400 on base. That came out of nowhere. Lonnie Smith's not a 300 hitter for his career, that's for sure. But you got Willie Wilson, who hit 367. George Brett, the Hall of Famer, hit 370. Steve Balboni hit 320. You know, these guys just hit the world that series. And of course, I mean, we talked about the pitching area. Brett Saberhagen started 2 games, completed 2 games. Denny Jackson started 2 games and completed 1 of the games, and pitched 7 innings in the other game. So they their pitching staff is just on fire against these Cardinals. And you look overall comparing all these teams, you look at the 85 the 85 Royals were the 2nd best hitting team, and they were they had the best ERA out of all these teams we're discussing today. So it just really shows that, they hit and they pitched all in the same World Series, and they beat the best team of the decade.
we had Mike Kingery on the show prior, and he was on the '86 Royals, but he was part of their minor league organization, and he mentioned Brett Saberhagen. And Scott, you mentioned Saberhagen. This was Saberhagen's on year because he was an every other year type of pitcher. '86 he had some injuries and had a down year, but Saberhagen absolutely amazing that year. Mike, let me ask you. Very good pitching staff. That's something we definitely have in common with all these teams tonight. But you can tell me about the team. But my biggest question for you about this is, I'm looking at the 4 teams tonight. They have great players, but is George Brett maybe the greatest position player we're talking about with all 4 teams? Because we know he did it clean, other than the little pine tar incident. But clean. He did it clean. We can't say that about everybody on the A's. The Mets had a lot of drug issues going on as well. So just your thoughts on that and the Royals and home.
Well, unless I'm forgetting something, I mean, absolutely. George Brett was a tremendous player. I mean, golly, one of the best. I mean, without forgetting somebody else, I'm sure I am forgetting somebody else, but I would say Ricky Henderson or George Brett. Great players. And I think he was such a leader and such a good hitter. And we're talking about the Royals. I mean, they got there and they won the World Series. How they did it, I don't know. Because I mean, yes, great pitching, and they got there and got it done. I'm not quite sure they were better than the Cardinals that year, but a lot of things can happen in a series. And when you look on paper, like you mentioned, with Lebron and Saberhagen and Danny Jackson and Bud Black and Gubazat and Quisenberry out of Penn, you kind of say, how do you not win more than 91 games? Almost shocked that they've only won 91 games. They must have had some pretty good competition during the season, because I'm looking at their pitching stats, and they weren't leaders in any categories, but on paper, I mean, golly, look at these guys, and wow, I'd like to have those pitchers with the Quisenberry coming out of the pen.
Yeah.
So, but to answer your question quickly, I absolutely agree with you. George Brett was pretty special.
Paul, you're my you're our best baseball guy of the guys that I have on these shows as far as playing goes. I know it's not involving the World Series, but what were your thoughts on that pine tar incident? I thought it was blown out of proportion.
Well, I'd have to go to somebody who could tell me what advantage that gives you to hit the ball better. I mean, it's, what that rule that, there's got to be a rule in place, I guess, for it. But if you have it a little higher, wasn't that the deal, right? It was a little too high on there. So what does that make it so that you can hit better? I've asked that before. I haven't thought about this in years, though, because I remember seeing when I was a young boy that dude lose his shit over that. But I asked over and over again, and I've never gotten a good answer. And I'm happy to have somebody educate me, because maybe I'm wrong.
Mike, what do you think?
If you don't mind me saying something, that's one of my pet peeves about baseball is inconsistencies. I agree with you, Paul, that how does it help you? But I guess the underlying theme is that was the rule. Why that was a rule, I have no idea. I mean, the pine tar can only go so high up. Why? But if you're going to make that rule, you better make sure every single guy that comes to the plate does that. And I don't think, I know Billy Barton called him on it. Why doesn't the umpire calling every single guy up there going, no, you can't use that bat, you can't use that bat? It's the inconsistencies. And then, we talk about, I know maybe we'll talk about the Hall of Fame later on. It drives me bananas. If we're going to attack one guy, let's attack them all. Either leave them all alone or attack everybody. So I agree with you. It's crazy. What the hell does that have to do with me throwing a pitch and guy knocking it out of the park because there's pine tar in the bat?
We got to remember. I mean, the only reason that everyone remembers that case is because George went nuts. He came running in the dugout with his arms flailing and his hair flying and his, everything going crazy and bumping the umpire. And, if the umpire had just tossed him out, and I won't say like normal people or most normal people, most guys would have obviously been mad because they're thrown out of the game. But a lot of people, I don't think, would have gone haywire like George did. And that's really the highlights. Every time you see the highlights, you see George going nuts and, for the call. So that's the memorable part for sure.
Well, let's move on to our final team tonight. That's going to be the '84 Detroit Tigers, led by manager Sparky Anderson, of course, who was famous for that big red machine over there in Cincinnati. So we got 5 All-Stars on this team, 104 wins. That was the best ever for the Detroit Tigers, which is kind of hard to believe. They had a lot of good teams through the years. 35-5 after the first 40 games. So after that, they could kind of just mail it in, and they still managed 104 wins. I think that's second best tonight, the 104 wins, right behind the Mets. So pitching wise, you got Cy Young winner Willie Hernandez. He was also the AL MVP, 32 saves and 33 attempts, quite impressive. Jack Morris was the best starter on that team. I mean, that could be argued actually, but he's a Hall of Famer. Got a no-hitter his first game that season. Started 10-1, had a little decline after that the rest of the season, but still very solid. Then you got all-star pitcher Don Petrie, 18-8. He had the lowest ERA for the team starters. And then you look at middle relief, which I want to point out because we got Mike Trombley on tonight. Middle relief here, we got Aurelio Lopez. So he was 10-1 with a 2.94 ERA in middle relief. Can't stress how important that is. Once your starters go out, get that middle relief in there before you get to the MVP Cy Young winner closer there in Willie Hernandez. So I'm trying to prove that my team is better than all yours. So I'm going to throw these little stats here. Of the teams that we're talking about tonight, the Tigers are the best, have the best team batting average by almost 10 percentage points. The most homers by almost 40, and the most runs scored by almost 50. So I put them as the best hitting team tonight. Fielding, we got 127 errors, which that tied the Royals out of the teams we're talking about tonight as the best. And their 979 fielding percentage as a team is second to only the Royals, who were at 980. So if I got all my stats right, there's some stuff there. So they had a great regular season. They go into the playoffs. They beat the Kansas City Royals, who would be in the World Series the next year. They swept them 3-0. Obviously, that was best of 5 back before they were doing the 7 games in the first round there. And they take out the Padres 4-1. It was never really that much of a series. Padres took game 2, but then after that, it was just kind of a rout. So I think the Tigers, I would take them over most of these teams. There was just stars all around the field, much like the Mets had stars all around. But you got Alan Trammell, Lou Whitaker, Chet Lemon was an all-star that year. Darrell Evans, great DH. Lance Parrish behind the plate, all-star catcher. And Kirk Gibson. I mean, he came up a little bit earlier when he was with the Dodgers. He's famous for that home run, but he was a much better player when he was with Detroit than he was when his body was broken down there with the Dodgers. And then, gosh, when he got to the Pirates in the 90s, the guy could barely walk. But hats off to him. He kept going. But I would take the Tigers over all of them. So, Mike, your thoughts on the Tigers? As mentioned, all-stars all around, Hall of Fame manager Sparky Anderson. What are your thoughts on this team?
Well, the more you look at the Tigers that year, the more I've become a believer. I mean, golly, they're solid. I mean, you talk about, Trammell Hall of Famer. Whitaker's probably gonna be a Hall of Famer. Gibson,
He's in. Whitaker's in.
Whitaker's in?
No, he's not. No, he's not.
No, I thought he got in on the Veterans Committee. No?
No, I don't think
Okay.
so. No.
All right, never mind then.
I'm not sure. So anyway, like you said, Gibson, I'm looking at the stats of Chet Lemon, solid, Darrell Evans, and then the pitching, Morris Petrie had great years. I mean, the amazing part is the middle reliever. This kind of hits home for me. How do you Aurelio Lopez, 10-1, how do you pitch 137 innings and not start a game?
Yeah.
It's incredible. So, the more you look at this, and I guess what we're talking about today is the best team. I mean, God, the more I'm looking at this is a team. This is, every part of it, from the starting pitching to Willie Hernandez, is one of the best seasons ever by a closer. And they were solid throughout. If you kind of want to punch holes before you look at the stats, saying, well, they're good hitters, but they're not great hitters. But like you said, they have 271 as a team. They scored a ton of runs. I know, pitching in Old Tiger Stadium was not, you don't have to hit it very far to get it out of there, but you got to pitch in there too. So it's, like I said, the more you look at it, then the more impressive they become. And I'm a big fan of this team.
Yeah, and then you guys are correct. I apologize. Whitaker is not in the Hall of Fame. Looks like in 2020, the Modern Baseball Era Committee had him on the ballot, and he fell short. So my bad on that right there. That's a shame.
Right.
He should be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, gosh, rookie of the year, 5 All-Stars. I think he's got gold gloves. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. We've had prior shows where we talk about how are these guys not getting Hall of Fame. So, but Brian, Detroit Tigers, your quick thoughts on them. I mean, Kirk Gibson, he's famous for the home run like we talked about, but Kirk Gibson was he could be up there possibly in Hall of Fame balloting, but he's not.
Yeah, well, I mean, what really jumps out at me at this, for this team is you mentioned the Whitaker and Trammell at second base and short. I mean, that was really, really solid for a very long time. And I don't recall the stats off the top of my head, but I think that was like one of the top ever, double play combinations, in the history of baseball. So that jumps out to me, right? Very strong, right down the middle.
Well, before we move into our vote, shout out to the 88 Dodgers who almost made the show tonight, but they were replaced kind of there at the last minute. So, and then I know that Mike, you wanted to throw a team in there you thought should have been on tonight's list.
Cardinals.
There you go. And as Scott mentioned earlier, he thinks they were the team of the decade. So let's move into our vote tonight. Cannot vote for your own. Paul, you're up first.
Man, it's close. I'll do the Mets. I'd love to see him play my represented A's. I wish that could happen, but I'll do the Mets.
Okay. Brian.
Well, yeah, I mean, 88, it almost did happen, but the Mets ran into the red hot Dodgers there. But yeah, I'm going to go with the A's on this one. I mean, that team was just, I mean, the Bash brothers, and then as Mike said, the pitching staff, and then I think maybe the most important part of that team was Ricky Henderson. I mean, the greatest leadoff hitter of all time. So yeah, I'm going to go with that.
Scott.
Well, I might have to go with the not the team I sort of argued for, but I guess the '84 Tigers. Like you said, the guys at the middle of the diamond's the important one, right? And they had the guys up the middle with Whitaker and Trammell and center field and catcher, and I can't remember their names, but those guys and some great pitching. So we'll go with the '84 Tigers, '84 World Series Tigers.
So I listened to your guys tonight, and I was beforehand on teetering between the A's and the Mets. The A's were my favorite team growing up, even though I lived in Pittsburgh. But gosh, I don't know if they did it clean. I kind of assume they don't because of what we found out in later years, and that bugs me. That bugs me a lot. So I think I'm giving my vote to the Mets because of that. Mike, let's go to you. Who are you voting for?
When you first asked me to come on here today and knew what we were talking about, and I was thinking, what's my gut reaction? And I would have said Mets or A's. Then as I started looking at the stats and really what I'm going with Tigers. And I'm going with Tigers because maybe partly because I'm a Red Sox fan, don't want to believe the Mets actually won the World Series. I blame Calvin Schiraldi. I don't blame Bill Buckner. I blame Calvin Schiraldi for that one. 0-2 on one guy and 1-2 on two other guys. You can't get it done. They should have won. But I'm going with the Tigers only because I think about a team, and they were a team. They had Trammell and Whitaker up the middle and everything you wanted in a team, and closers and starters, and they rolled through it. So I'm going with the Tigers 84.
All right, so that's 2 votes for the Tigers, 2 for the Mets, and 1 for the A's. So when we have a tie, the tiebreaker goes to the special guest vote. He voted for the Tigers, so
I'll take my vote.
Yeah. Greatest World Series winner of the 80s legacy battles. We've got the 1984 Detroit Tigers. Let's move into our Q&A here tonight for Mike. Oh, wow, I got the win. It's been a long time since I won a show.
Didn't you tell me to vote for him?
I haven't won a show in a long time, so it's good. All right, so let me ask you here. As a reliever, what are your thoughts on today's game with the 5th starter a lot of times now being full of relief pitchers. They call them an opener, and then they just bring in relievers all the way through. And how do you think you would have adjusted to having to be an opener?
Golly, that's a tough one because it's tough to watch baseball in that respect. I'm not a fan of. I used to. I mean, I'm a baseball purist guy. I love to see the starter go deep into the game, and it's getting shorter and shorter every starter. Yeah. I'm not quite sure how I like that. How I perform. I mean, I guess if you got to do what you got to do, I think I get used to it. I joke that when I was early in my career, I was a starter, but I was more of a short starter because I pitched so damn bad. So they made me a reliever. But it was just, the way the game's going. I think you see in the playoffs, hey, I'm from whatever gets the hitters out and whatever works, I'm okay with. And every team's different. So for a hitter to see the pitcher less and less makes it tougher on the hitter. So I see how it's going. I think that's the way of the future. And also these pitchers are 100% every single pitch. They can't pitch. They can't throw 120 pitches like they used to.
Right.
So,
Scott.
Yeah, I got a bunch of questions. We'll just go one. We'll just give you one right now. 96 was your best season, correct?
I would say my best season was 98.
Okay.
Yeah.
What made it click? What made it your best season? Like what worked for you that year that didn't work other years?
Honestly, it was the split finger fastball, my forkball. When I came up with the Twins, I never a hard thrower. I was a pretty hard thrower in the minor leagues and came up, but over the years, my fastball was going down and down. I was not a hard thrower, but I always had good breaking stuff. And I had a real good slider when I first came up, but just like a lot of young pitchers, they got through the league the first, second time. Once the hitters started seeing it, I was actually sent back to AAA in 94 for a month, 95, then a strike, and part of 96. And I started throwing a split finger fastball, and that made all the difference. You saw me, I was stat wise from 94, 95, and then 96 through 98 or 99. I was a different pitcher. I mean, I threw all splits. Rick Aguilera helped me develop a great split finger fastball and how to use it as a get me over pitch strike, and then use the fork ball when 2 strikes. That made all the difference. My fork ball maybe made my career for me. So,
Brian.
I understand you have a funny story about your first major league check in Kirby Puckett. Yes. And can you tell us that story, and can you tell us what it was like to play with Kirby?
Yeah, well, that's a good story. He was one of those guys where I'm very fortunate to play with him, got to know him, and he was a funny guy. He was just good for Major League Baseball. He was good with opposing fans that got on him. He just had this wit about him that made you love him. But Kirby Puckett, great story. So 1992, and again, I'm a kid from Western Massachusetts. Never thought I was going to play one day of professional baseball. So I get called up in 92, and I'm walking on eggshells because I'm scared to death. Well, we get paid every 2 weeks. So I get my first in Minnesota. Tom Kelly made a point of, he handed out the checks to people, and he'd give some comments like, you pitched shitty this week, and, you stink, and you don't deserve this money, and whatever it is. So he'd have the check. So I'm sitting in my locker with my major league check, my first major league check. And Puckett comes over, and for a slight moment, he looked at me, he goes, "First big league check, huh?" And I said, "Yeah." And I was very proud of myself. I was happy. I was like, "God, this is all the money in the world to me right now." And I was almost, for a slight second, I'm like, "Hey, that was pretty cool of him, man. Come over and acknowledge." And so he looked at me, he says, "Mike, never forget this moment. This is a big moment right here." I'm like, "That's pretty cool, Puck." Well, he takes out a wad of money about this big and says, "You want me to cash it for you?" And I go, "Son of a..." But that was Puck. That was just way of him acknowledging my first check. I mean, paying attention to Mike Trombley was such a kick for me, but then to rib me a little bit was just solid. So he was a really, really good guy. Very fortunate. We lost him way too early, but he was a good man for baseball.
Yeah, we did lose him too early. That was a shame. Paul.
Yeah, my first question is more of a technical one. To piggyback off what Scott was saying, I read about your split finger. I read that you went to the minors, and it was kind of like something you developed to give you a leg up. So that's my question. Did that come about on your own, or did you get advice to develop that pitch? And then did that end up being your go-to, your most comfortable pitch?
Well, interesting story. When I was I threw a split in college a little bit and fooled around with it. I didn't know how to pitch. I was just kind of fooling around with different pitches, a slider, a curveball, a two-seamer, four-seamer, all this stuff, a cutter. So I threw a split a little bit in college and abandoned it because I was roommates with Denny Nagel in the minors. And I saw how effective his changeup was. I'm like, you got to teach me that. So I started throwing a changeup. So I was throwing fastball, slider, changeup. And then, over the years, it worked for a little while, like I said earlier in my career, but then I started getting banged around a little bit, sent down the minors, and I had to reinvent myself. So I thought to myself, hey, what if I go back to the split, make my slider into more of a curveball, because my split and my slider were the same speed. So I slowed up my slider, made it more of a slurve, and threw the split. And like I said, Aguilera helped me a lot, and there's no question. It was my go-to pitch. If it was up to me, I never throw another pitch other than the split. And listen, I was not the best pitcher in the world, and I'm a pretty humble guy. But there were times where I'm on the mound, and when the split worked, they couldn't hit it. And I'm talking about, I remember pitch facing Will Clark and Pudge Rodriguez and guys like that. And Mike Trombley thinks they can't hit it. Split's pretty damn good pitch. You know what I mean? It was working, it's good. When it's not working, not so good. But when it was absolutely my go-to pitch.
Do you think that prolonged your career?
It made my career. It didn't prolong it. It actually ended it quicker. But put this way, if I didn't throw a split, I'd be home quicker. So it made me be successful in the big leagues, but it didn't hurt my arm. It just took so much off my fastball that I got to 34 years old and I couldn't throw a fastball hard enough to keep everybody off the plate. So it kind of did damage to my fastball, miles per hour. So if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, Mike, you were traded, or no, the question later. More current question for you. The rules are talking about putting in soon this year, next year, the bigger bases, the pitch clock, maybe even robot umps. They all seem to be against the pitcher. Those things, or the what do you think about the bigger bases, pitch clock, robot umps, any of those topics?
I don't think the bigger bases are that bad of an idea. I think that's I'm not quite sure about the security of the game and why that's being put in there, but I'm not against that. I do think the game is too slow. I think it's too boring. But I think it's a contrasting argument that we're trying to make the game quicker. We're gonna have a pitch clock, but we can review more calls. I don't understand. And so if the argument is we want to get the calls right, I say this all the time in football. If you want to get the calls right, let's review every damn call. But do we want to get them right, or we want to get the game faster? So in baseball, it's this, back and forth stuff that I'm not quite sure where they are, because if someone put a pitch clock on me, and I've been using an example of pitching a Nomar Garcia party, you get up there and do this batting glove thing and take forever to get in the box. What happens is there's a pitch clock, and so I got to throw a pitch in a certain amount of time, but a bug goes in the hitter's eye. So what happens? Can he step out? Can he not step out? I mean, the pitch clock is going. I got to throw a pitch, but he's not ready. So there's going to be, I don't know if they'll ever implement that, because there's so many ways around that. You're just making a way to beat the system. So I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. I do know that the game is a little slow, but there's so much money involved, and every kid who's taking lessons now as we speak with their instructor is looking for that big pile of gold for playing baseball, and they'll do anything and everything to take a few more seconds to get in the box or throw the pitch. There's too much thinking going on, which is, I think, a bad thing. So I don't know if it answered your question, but I'm not a big fan of some of the rule changes that are coming. So
that's good. That's good. Thanks,
Brian.
Well, I mean, you were considered, one of the better setup men during your time. But what is the mindset for a setup man, and how does it differ from a starter's or a closer's mindset?
I wasn't happy about going to the bullpen when I first do it, but I was much more suited to go to the bullpen. And what I liked is every single game, I could go to the ballpark and have a chance to pitch. And I took great pride in my arm. Still to this day, I'm gonna knock on wood, my arm never hurt a day in my life. So as long as I could, not tired arm or something like that, I could go to the ballpark and be part of that. And once I became more of an established setup man, I knew that when the game was close and we had a chance to win, that I was going to get a phone call down to the bullpen. I liked that a lot. So swallow my pride, realizing, geez, I'm really not suited to be a starter, or didn't throw hard enough to be a closer. I really grasp the idea that, hey, this is my role. This is what I'm good at. And I think I can help the team. And, but going to the ballpark every day, knowing I had a chance to pitch was a terrific thing. As a starter, you go on pitch one bad day, you got to wait 4 more days to prove yourself. You
Right.
can't really rest too much on the good and the bad of being a reliever. So,
Paul.
I was looking at your rosters that you played for, and I think it was the Twins. A name from my younger days stood out to me, Scott Erickson. When I was younger, he was like one of the first guys that got media attention for, I think, there's some licorice involved, Black Sox. Was he the looniest? Did you have some loony habits or superstitions, or was he kind of blown out of proportion? Do you have another name you're thinking of?
well, according to me, I don't think I'm wacky. I'm about the most straight-laced guy. Wilbraham, Mass, went to Duke University. Golly, you couldn't get any more boring than me. Scotty Erickson, I will tell you this. He was Superman. He was chiseled out of stone, a good-looking guy who had the blinders on. I mean, he was filthy. I mean, he was, you talk about Rivera throwing one pitch. He could go in there with one pitch. That slider, that sinking fastball hit just went wham. It was incredible. He had some arm trouble, but he was a big, strong guy. But I remember, he had a deal, I think with Adidas or Nike, but he blacked out his shoes. So Nike said, listen, I'm not going to give you free cleats when the people on TV can't see the swoosh or what the hell kind of spikes you're wearing. So he had to keep part of it, the back of his cleat, white, so the people on TV could tell what kind of spikes he was wearing. So yes, he was a little different, but he was not by any means. There were some wackier people out there. Turk Wendell's a good buddy of mine, and he was through the roof wacky.
We have Marty Cordova on the show. Did he have any superstitions?
He didn't like losing at cards. He'd bitch about losing at cards all the time. No, I'll tell you, Marty and I were really close, and he was one of the funniest guys I've been around. I'll tell you a quick story. This is kind of a cute story. So with the Twins, and I don't want to go on and on, guys. Just cut me off.
It's fine. No.
So with the Twins, it was every team's like this. We all get together and gamble let's say the Masters is going on. So you would get together with a couple other guys, and you'd have a group. You'd have a group name. So it was me and Rick Aguilera and Pat Mahomes were part of our group. We were, instead of Oreo, we were Oro, because instead of going black, white, black, we were white, black, white. So we were the opposite of Oreo. So our name of our corporation was Oro. Okay. Well, Marty Cordova and Scott Stahoviak and Rich Becker had a corporation that they bet, Kentucky Derby or the March Madness, they bet together. So Tom Kelly was walking around a locker room one time, asked Marty Cordova, he said, hey, have you thought of a name for your corporation with Stahoviak and Becker? And they said, no. Well, Tom Kelly says, well, why don't you add your batting averages together and call yourselves the 400 Club? So Marty Cordova said to Tom Kelly, why don't you jump in with us? We'll be the 500 Club. He was just a funny guy. I mean, just shooting down people, quick-witted, good player. And again, talk about a guy chiseled out of stone. That was Marty Cordova. Just a solid guy. Good teammate. Very good teammate.
So we'll get you out of here with this tonight. I'll kind of move it into a two-parter here, but so 99, you filled in the closer role there. You picked up 24 saves. Maybe tell me about that year a little bit, but then also, I just wanted to know your thoughts on this. Is the All-Star game and middle relievers, other than was it Reminger with the Braves? I think it was. I don't ever remember them putting in middle relievers. Do you have any idea why that is, and do you think that they should be in there?
Absolutely be in there. I thank Mariano Rivera, because when he was the middle reliever, when he was the setup man for Wetland, he got all this attention. And listen, like I said, I don't need any pats on the back, but I still to this day think I should have been in the 99 All-Star game. I think I started that year. It was either 98 or 99. Started the year, first 26 innings, I gave up no runs. 0. I mean, golly, I was going to sail through the season and just have good stats. But all of a sudden, because of Mariano Rivera, middle relievers got more attention. And then he became the closer. But I think absolutely the All-Star game was a player's a player, and a DH does his role. The middle reliever does his role. And like I said, that's one regret I had, is I thought I should have made the All-Star team over Ron Coomer. They had to take somebody from every team, and they took Ron Coomer because they needed another hitter and not another pitcher. That's one of my regrets. I would have liked to said, hey, when I'm on your show today going, all-star Mike Trombley. Sounds better than so middle reliever Mike Trombley. So, what the hell?
Fair
Can't
enough.
have everything.
Fair enough. Well, remind everybody, hit subscribe on whatever you're listening on. We want to thank Mike Trombley for coming on tonight. Thank you so much, Mike. Honored to have you here.
Awesome, guys. Thanks.
Awesome. So everybody, thank you for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like I said, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night.